Here we got some flour, water, salt, and sugar. Now it's getting thick. See, it looks almost like a porridge. Okay, we're gonna put 2 heaping teaspoons of yeast in each bowl. See how I can pick it up and it stays together for like a count of 3 at least? That's good enough. I just move it around like this, and I count to 20 while I'm doing it. And both of these are now, the bread is above the top rim of the pan. Okay, so it's time to cook them. Should be hard on the top, like that. If you've greased them properly, they should pop right out like that. You can see what it looks like on the inside. Look at that. Holy moly. And the bread's nice and soft. Butter onto this one here. I don't think that's enough, do you? No. All right. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and today I'm going to show how to make white bread and raisin bread, and this is a video for kids. I've got 2 teenagers, so I'm hoping that they can use this video to make bread for me. But otherwise, parents out there, this is a video for kids on how to make bread. I'm going to keep it really simple, and I'm going to make it twice, 2 different ways, just to show you how easy this is using this technique, okay? So all you need for this recipe is some instant yeast. I'll put up a picture of the one I use, but you don't have to use that one. Some sugar or molasses. I'm making raisin bread, need molasses for that. I'm just using plain old white sugar for the other one, but you can use honey or whatever. Some salt, and a little butter and water. That's all, and flour, okay? And I'm just using all-purpose flour here. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is get a measuring cup and fill the water up to where it says 1 2/3 cup, okay? And you put that in the bowl. That's it. Now this one here, see how it's dark? This is for making the raisin bread, which has some molasses. Molasses is a liquid. So I put a 1/4 cup of molasses, and then I fill this up until it reaches 1 2/3 cup, right? So I've got just the same amount of liquid in each bowl. Okay, so this is just a 1/4 cup of molasses, and I just filled it with water until it got up to 1 2/3 cup. Okay, there's our liquid. Now for each of these, I'm just a regular teaspoon, kind of like a heaping teaspoon, teaspoon of salt in each one. Okay, 1 teaspoon of salt. Now this is my white bread over here, so I'm going to put 2 teaspoons, these are heaping teaspoons, of sugar in this one. You don't need to put sugar in this if you're trying to have less sugar in your life, but it makes it taste better. This has already got molasses in it. Molasses is sugar, so I'm not adding anything over here. Okay, now we've done everything we need to do for that stage. Now we're going to get a one cup measure. We're going to add a cup of flour to each one. All right. That's it. Now you take a spoon and you stir it. I think I'll move the camera in now so you can see exactly what I'm doing. All right, so this is my going to be my raisin bread. I mean, if you don't add raisins, then it's molasses bread. Right, and there's all kinds of different flours you can use for this. I'm just keeping it simple. I don't want to get into that in this recipe, but you can put oatmeal or rye flour or whatever. There's different ways to mess around with it. But for now, we're just using the simple stuff, all-purpose white flour. Okay, I've mixed that in. Now over here, I'll just mix the white. Doesn't matter that I'm using the same spoon. I won't tell anybody if you don't tell anybody. All right. Here we got some flour, water, salt, and sugar. I'll stick it here so I don't make a mess. Okay, we're ready now. Now I'm going to add another cup of flour. Notice I haven't added my yeast yet. I will. But this I'm using instant yeast, so it's very easy to use. Okay, now I'll mix that in, right? See how easy this is? Not complicated. Now it's getting thick. See, it looks almost like a porridge. See? That's all mixed. Okay, now I'll do this one here. Same idea. Mix it until all that flour is really, really worked in there. This one seems wetter than the other one. I don't know why. Maybe I put a little bit more flour in the other one, but it doesn't matter. Okay? All right, I got a second spoon here. Let's use that. Now, yeast. All right, once you buy your yeast, I buy my yeast in large quantities, and I keep it in the freezer. If you don't know this about yeast, yeast is alive. Right now, this yeast is what a biologist would call dormant, but you could just pretend it's sleeping. Okay, we're going to put 2 heaping teaspoons of yeast in each bowl. 1, 2. What we're doing with this yeast, mixing it in with the water and with the flour and that sugar in there, is that we're going to wake it up. That's what we're doing. It's going to dissolve a little bit into the water. I mean, each one of these grains of yeast is like a whole bunch of little animals, kind of, right? And they're going to become awake. And once they're awake, just like you do when you wake up, they're going to want to eat something, and they've got all kinds of stuff to eat in here, okay? And that's what we want them to do. Okay, we've got that all well mixed. Now we're going to add another cup of flour. So this is cup number 3. Okay, we've added 3 cups of flour to each bowl. And at this stage, for the raisin bread, this is a good time to add the raisins. I think about half a cup. 1/2 cup of raisins is good for 1 loaf. Okay, we'll put that in. Okay, now we mix this all in. All right. Now when you're adding flour to dough, I mean, I'd like to give you perfect measurements that would work perfectly all the time, but it just doesn't work that way when it comes to making dough. Flour and water always, from day to day, all of the flour in my big bag of flour has some amount of water in it, tiny, tiny amounts of water, just like the air you're breathing has water in it, believe it or not. Some air is drier than other air. And in the same way, some flour is drier than other flour. So we never know exactly how much flour we need to add. All I know is that it's usually around 3 cups. But I mix it, and I'm looking for a particular consistency. What I want when I mix this flour in, when I mix the dry flour in with everything that's wet in the bowl, is I want a ball to start to form, almost like what's happening with this white here. A ball that sticks to my spoon. See that sticking to the spoon and doesn't stick to the bowl too much. See how this has a very unique texture. So it's sort of coming away. You want to get it so that you can mix all that flour just with your spoon and pick it up, and the whole thing comes with the spoon and doesn't fall apart. See how this is falling apart? Right, we're very close, but we're not quite there. Okay, so I see this needs maybe just a 1/4 cup more flour, just a little bit more. And this probably needs 1/2 cup more flour. So I'm going to fill up a 1/2 cup and I'm going to put some of it in. I'm going to mix with my spoon. Now this takes a bit of physical strength, but I'm not the strongest man in the world, so just use your muscles and you'll be fine. Take bread, you can hold it in against your body like this to hold the bowl in place. If you don't hold the bowl, it'll go all over the place, knock everything off the counter and make a mess. That wasn't enough flour. I'm going to add all of it. So this, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but the molasses bread seemed to need 3.5 cups of flour. Just mixing that in. See how this is now forming a ball, and it's really kind of staying together. Might have a little too much in there, but I think it'll be fine. Now, the thing about making bread is that it doesn't have to be perfect. I probably could have added a little less flour in there, but it'll be just fine. But you see how it's come away from the bowl? It's not sticking to the bowl anymore, right? I probably could have gone a little bit, probably didn't need exactly 3.5 cups, maybe just a little bit more than 3 1/4 would have been fine. Well, I'm going to say that's done for now, okay? Now, let's go back to this one. Based on how it feels today, and sometimes 3 cups is enough, but today it doesn't seem like it's enough. I'm going to add half of a 1/4 cup. What's that in your math? Do your math. Find the common denominator, all that stuff. That's 1/8 cup, but this is just a 1/4 cup. I'm just eyeballing it, guessing. Guesstimations. I think that's coming away from the bowl pretty nice. It's still kind of sticky to the touch, but see how I can pick it up and it stays together for like a count of 3 at least? That's good enough. Oh, some on my shirt here. That's all you need, right? Forms a ball, rolls around the bowl like that. When you pick it up on the spoon, you can count to 3 and it won't fall back. Eventually it'll fall back down, right? That's good enough. Now our dough is ready. Now we have to let it sit. And we have to let, for both of these, we have to let the yeast wake up and start feeding on the sugars and stuff that's in there. And when it does that, it's going to kind of fart, for lack of a better terminology. Gases start escaping from the yeast, and that makes the bread rise. Also, over time, just by letting the bread sit like this, all the little tiny, this looks like a powder, right? But it's actually little tiny particles of ground up wheat. And those little tiny particles of ground up wheat will suck up the water that's in here, right? Because this is a good portion of this is water. And all those little particles of flour are going to start swelling up with that water and getting softer. It'll make us a nice, soft, delicious bread. So let me show you the next stage. Now we have our bread, our dough, and it needs to rise. And it needs to rise for a good hour. And dough likes the same temperature your body likes. Likes to be warm. Just if you put your hand on your arm or your belly or something like that, that's the temperature the dough likes to be. That's the temperature the yeast likes, body temperature. So a really easy way to give the yeast the conditions it wants is just stick the bowl in the oven like this and get a big bowl of hot tap water from the tap. Just put the tap on, in your kitchen sink, put it on the hottest setting it has, and fill it up. Be careful. You might want to use gloves or something like that. Oven mitts to move it around. You don't want to spill any on yourself, especially if your water is really hot. But you just put that underneath. Of course, sometimes we forget. It's hard to tell. The dough has to rise. That way you know the yeast is working and everything's happening. Now you can just you can look at it and try to remember how it looked and try to remember later on that it's, compare what it looks like to what you remember it looking like. But if you want to be precise, you must be taking science in school. What do we do in science class? We measure things and we write them down. So I can just measure how far it is from the side of this ball of dough to the edge of the bowl, okay? So for this white bread, that's 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters, okay? And for the brown, it's about the same thing, okay? So we're talking 3.5 inches, 9 centimeters. So I'll write that down, and then in about an hour, we'll see how much this dough has risen. We'll see in an hour. This oven is not on, okay? The oven's off. The only heat in the oven is being provided by the bowl of hot water we've stuck underneath the bread. Just want to make that clear. Okay, we'll see in an hour. All right, so it's been about an hour and a half. I've taken these out of the oven, and if we measure carefully, I can see that the bread has now risen to the point where it's about 2.5 inches from the edge as opposed to 3.5 inches, so it's risen, okay? That's enough for now. So now all I gotta do is take both loaves, both of the bowls of bread, and with a spoon, use a spoon that's strong enough and won't bend when you're doing this. Again, if you're having a hard time, just hold it into your belly and just move it around like this. What I usually do, you can see how I'm just moving this around. Now in the old days, they put it on the counter with flour and they do this thing called kneading. And you can do that, but this works just fine. It's not nearly as messy, so it's easier to clean up. And it kind of resembles, I think, what happens in a bread machine without having to buy the bread machine. Anyway, I just move it around like this, and I count to 20 while I'm doing it, and that should be enough. And you notice the bread's shrunk now. It's back to being a small ball of bread. Okay, I've done the same thing with the brown bread. Okay, so now all I do, I don't have to replace the water. The oven's nice and warm. When I open up the door, you can feel the heat and humidity. It's basically dark, moist, almost like the inside of a body, right? Which is exactly what yeast loves. So I just put these back in this oven. Remember, the oven's not on, the oven's off. There's just a bowl of hot water in the bottom, keeping it nice and warm. I'm gonna put these back in the oven for about 30, 35 minutes, all right? So I'll see you after that. The next stage is when we actually put these in the loaf pans and start turning this into something resembling bread, all right? So we'll see you in about 35 minutes. All right, it's been a little over half an hour, so let's take it out of the oven and see what it looks like. So you can see both balls of dough have risen back to that size. So that's what we've just done, is what's called a double rise. We mixed it up, we let it rise, we punched it down, we messed around with it, and it rose again. Now it's time to put them in the loaf pans so they can rise a third and final time before we actually bake the bread. So this does take time, right? But if you do it this way, you'll get really good bread. I've got these metal loaf pans. You have to ask your parents to get you proper loaf pans. There's other things. There's options. If you've got a pot or a pan that can handle the temperatures of the oven, and you have to ask your parents to figure that out for you. But to be safe, I mean, if you're operating the oven, you should always ask your parents to help you, right? So, like this is the sort of thing we're using an oven, there's high temperatures, lots of things can go wrong. This is not something you do without your parents around. But everything we've done so far, you can certainly do safely without your parents around, right? We're just mixing bread and letting it rise, right? It takes a long time anyway. So this is the sort of thing, you come home from school, you mix the bread, you let it rise, you stir it back down, you let it rise again. If you time it right, the time to put it in the oven will be roughly when your parents come home, and everything can be done safely, right? But all we're doing right now is just putting it in the bread pans. So each of these, I've greased them up real good with some butter, right? You can use margarine, butter, whatever you got. Now, each of these breads, right? I'm just going to do the same thing I did before. Right, stir it again until the ball gets small again. Right? And kind of counting to 20, or just like sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that sort of thing, right? That's all you have to do. This just helps the dough rise properly. Okay, now so that's ready to go in the pan. All I just do is carefully help that out with the spoon. Notice I haven't used any fancy tools. Right, there's lots of ways to make bread. And I mean, this isn't the only way I make bread, but I tried to make this recipe as simple to follow as possible with as few ingredients as possible. There's our raisin bread. You can push it around with the spoon a little bit, but don't mess with it too much. It will just fall into place. It'll find where it needs to go over time. Okay, so that's our raisin. Now we take our white and we do the same thing. We just mix her all up, right? Trying to sort of in your head, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, that sort of thing, right? Till your arm, for me, after I've gotten to about 20, that's when my arm gets sore. This is a good way to build up your muscles, I guess. All right, so I'd say that's enough. All right, notice how it's gotten much smaller, right? It was all the way, you can see this line, it was all the way to here. Now it's become small again. And we just help it out of the bowl into the bread pan. All right, there we go. Now, all we got to do now, we're going to put it back in the oven for a final rise. It's still nice and warm in there from that bowl of water I put in the bottom. Surprising how warm it is. I can feel it. My hand goes in there. Yeah, there's still good warmth there. All right, so this final rise takes very little time, anywhere from 15 to 20 to 25 minutes. Really depends on how warm it is in there and just what's going on. Again, rise times are different every day, so you can't really pick a particular time. So what I'm waiting for is for each of these to rise to the point where the dough is actually above this line. Here, let me get a bit closer. Right now the bread is below the line. Right, it's not higher than the pan. Right, we just mixed it. But in about 15-20 minutes it'll be higher than the pan. Maybe the width of my thumb. Right, the very top of this bread here will be about the width of my thumb higher than the pan. All right, that's what I'm waiting for. Once it does that, I can turn the oven on and do the next step. So that'll take anywhere from 15 to 20 to 25 minutes. It's just a waiting game. So we'll see you in 15 minutes and see where things are, okay? Be right back. All right, so it's been actually 30 minutes. I checked it at 15 minutes, 20, 25, and 30. And it's 30 minutes now, so we're gonna check it. And both of these are now, the bread is above the top rim of the pan. Okay, so it's time to cook them. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the bowl of water from the oven. I have the rack in the middle of the oven. Racks can be moved higher or lower in the oven. I have it in the middle. But carefully put both the loaves of bread in. Close it up. And I'm going to set this to, I'm going to set this to 375. I'm going to cook it for 50 minutes. Now, some bread recipes you put the bread in when the oven's hot. This one here, you put the bread in the cold oven. So the oven was off. I put the loaves in the oven. I've just turned it on to 375, and the bread's going to cook for 50 minutes, 50, right? 375 Fahrenheit. So after 50 minutes, we'll take it out, and I'll show you what to do next. All right, so it's been 50 minutes. We're going to take the bread out and have a look. Looks pretty good. And the raisin bread looks pretty good. Turn the oven off. Now, the trick with bread when you take it out of the oven is that you've got to get it out of the pans right away. If you've greased them properly, they should pop right out like that. You want to get it out of the pan so that there's still moisture trapped inside the loaf. If you leave it inside this pan, the moisture will actually make it wet on the outside and not nice and dry with a nice crust. So in a sense, the bread needs to breathe. Okay? So it should have this sound. It should be hard on the top, like that. Okay? After about an hour, it'll actually soften up a bit. Now when you take it out like this, you want to brush a little bit of butter. Not much, just like about a teaspoon is all you need on the tops of each loaf. Makes it taste good and keeps the top of the bread will still have a nice crust, especially when you put it in the toaster. But yeah, brushing the tops just gives it a nice, perfect finish. There. Now, the impulse is to cut the bread and eat it right away. The whole house smells like bread. It smells really good. But you're better off waiting an hour or more before you cut the bread. Right now, the bread is hard on the outside and incredibly soft on the inside. And if you try to cut it, it'll mess the bread up. In about half an hour, it'll be super duper duper soft. And what'll happen is that when you try to cut it, even if you've got a really good sharp bread knife, it'll squish the bread. The bread has all this moisture inside of it, moist air, and it needs to get out. And once the bread is sat out for about an hour or so, it won't be so moist on the inside. And when you cut it, it'll cut properly. It won't get all, it's hard to explain, but the bread inside, we have like an outer crust here, and inside of this is actually hot and steamy and moist. And even though you got a crust in the outside, a lot of that moisture still can get out of the bread, needs to get out of the bread. So you can cut it, you can kind of do it right now and eat it, but you're better off waiting at least an hour, which is what I'm gonna do. So this is all done, the oven's off. You know, we've been careful with the bread. It's quite hot right now. In about an hour, this will be great. We'll kind of do it and have a little taste. Okay, so it's time. It's been about an hour or so since these were came out of the oven. So now here, bring it close. So you can just see, got my 13-year-old daughter filming here. So you can see what it looks like on the inside. Look at that. Holy moly. Smell? Mm-hmm, yes. All right, I'm gonna have this. She wants the white. You can also see the top here. It's gone from being sounding hollow to not sounding hollow. It's more soft and pushy, for lack of a better term. And the bread's nice and soft. All right. Okay, let me slather on some of the good stuff here. A little butter on this one here for me. And butter onto this one here. I don't think that's enough, do you? No. All right. Okay, just an afternoon snack. All right, zoom out a little bit and you grab yours.
Yeah.
All right. Yep, that's really good bread.
Yes.
What do you think?
Delicious.
Delicious. Okay. Now I gotta finish chewing this so I can wrap the video up.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's how you make homemade bread. All the steps. Get your parents to help you with the oven and all that sort of stuff so you don't burn your hands or burn the house down. Otherwise, give it a try. I hope you like it. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.